several shows planned, lined up for you all tonight. Hearthstone. I think I'm gonna hope to clear out my quest log today. Fallout 76 Chapter 3 should be today. And let's see what else. Phoenix Trial Part 3, Part 2 of Episode 5 should be today as well. I had my art stream earlier, but frustratingly it didn't save, I don't think. So I'll have to show you all the finished product. And I'm hoping that this stream saves my Russian author just chatting. Seems finicky sometimes. Yeah. Like I think I said before, I think it has to do with how many people watch the show. If I don't get any views, then I think that in turn it doesn't save. I don't know if it's necessarily the cause. Like it might be a chicken and egg situation where it's like, is it a glitch in the Twitch system and that's what's preventing me from getting exposed and my videos getting saved? Or is it because I'm not getting any views that my videos aren't getting saved? I'm not sure. But as I always say, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the show, whether it's with a share, view, follow, etc., etc. And I hope you enjoy this series. As I said, I can showcase my Thanksgiving art finished product so that you can use that as a guide for your own project at home. And as I've also said, feel free to use whatever you have on hand. I mean, it's an example that I provided, and you won't have the advantage necessarily of seeing me create it, but you'll be able to see the finished product, and that should give you an idea to go off of. And you can use whatever you have on hand, whether that's construction paper, crayons, colored pencils like I used, or pastels like I used, or you can even use paints. Sky's the limit with art. That's the beauty of art. And yeah, again, I'm a little bit disappointed that it didn't say, because that was going to be the third episode of my art series. But what I also made reference to during that stream is that we'll have more art shows planned through the winter. I should have, I think, maybe a couple of different projects lined up that are going to be winter themed and perhaps also holiday themed. And it could also have a couple of like one or maybe two fall themed before we get into the winter themed art projects. But yeah, it would help for you to let me know if you have a preference either way. But yeah, I can always just put some ideas together behind the scenes and showcase to you what I come up with, and I hope you enjoy what I provide. Kind of on the topic of the reading series, I've got a couple books here that I borrowed from the library. One of the TikTokers I follow is, I think his name is Abraham Piper. He's pretty popular. He recommended a couple of different books his videos today. And one of those books was this one, The Brothers K by David James Duncan. And I was thinking about buying these books, and I remembered, I'm like, oh hey, I actually have a library card. And it's like, haha, I can borrow these books. I don't need to buy them. And so I did. And I think they saved me like $30 just getting these books. But another book that I wanted to read for a really long time that I haven't had a chance to read before is this one, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I remember, like, probably like 5 or 10 years ago, maybe, my sister gave me this book to read, and I never got around to reading it. I think there is a copy of it still in the house that I grew up in. I just didn't take it with me. She also gave me The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I've read that entire book series. You can find it on YouTube, Stormer Show. For those of you that are curious about that story and interested in following that storyline, I would highly recommend it. Oscar Wilde's a very talented writer, and that definitely comes through in that book. And yeah, I think that it's just a good story in general. But these books are also ones that I could read here on the show. Funnily enough, they might actually be easier to get through than War and Peace. Because we're barely 20% of the way through War and Peace. And we've been reading like a chapter, pretty much a chapter a day for like the last month. So yeah, that just gives you an idea about the size and scope of War and Peace. Like, it's probably gonna be something like mid 2022 by the time we're finished with that book. Meanwhile, Crime and Punishment, we're 73% of the way through. So it's highly likely that we'll be able to finish Crime and Punishment by the end of the year. In Crime and Punishment, I have been extremely satisfied with that book. Like, it's been a joy just reading the book and sharing it with you all on the show. War and Peace feels at times tedious with some of the interactions and segues that are like happening on the sidelines. Like, the battles are interesting and engaging, but it's like the politics and some of that stuff, it's like, it's sometimes tedious to get through. Crime and Punishment, it's just like boom, boom, boom. Like, it's, yeah, I think it's easily one of my favorite books of all time, Crime and Punishment. And it's been a joy sharing it with you all. Much the same, I could also have a series based around these books. These books, I'm going to have them until mid-December. I might be able to renew them if possible, but yeah, it is an option, is what I'm saying, for content here on the channel. Okay, so let's go into War and Peace today. We're in chapter 14. We ended last time with a chapter with a, a letter written by Napoleon himself. And I'm not exactly sure how much of this is based in reality, actual historical accounts, and how much of this Leo has made up. I'm not exactly sure. Presumably at least some of it is based in reality. It's hard for me to determine sometimes the difference between nonfiction and realistic fiction, especially in a work like War and Peace. Like, it's hard for me to tell like for example, Mademoiselle Bourienne is a fictional character. She's not real. Meanwhile, Napoleon is real, or he was real. Likewise, Tsar Alexander was a real person too. So it's like, I think a lot of the book is based on real events. I think is how it is. Did Napoleon actually write this letter? I'm not exactly sure. Alright, anyway, chapter 14, here we go. And for anyone following at home, if you can remind me through the chat to take a look at the Thanksgiving art, I'd really appreciate that. If nothing else, I'll just try to remember myself at the end of the stream. Actually, let me go ahead and just do that right now, since it is on the top of my brain. Okay, so I had like an entire art stream today that was titled like Thanksgiving art or something like that, and yeah, the whole thing totally did not save, frustratingly, but I could still share with you guys the finished product. So, yeah, this one's more like old school, where you just trace your hand, and then as you can see, I colored mine in with colored pencil. But what's cool about this style is that, kind of what I made reference to, is that especially if you do it with your family and or kids, younger children, if you have any, each year that you do one of these handcrafts, either whether it's a Halloween craft or like handprint reindeer, which I've done in the past, or Thanksgiving handprint like this one, you'll be able to see it change in size over time. Especially if you do it each year, you'll be able to see it gradually increase in size with the changing size of your kid's hand, or your own hand for that matter. So I think that's pretty cool. It's almost like one of those like little height measurement marks that people used to have. Like you can like mark off your height on the wall. This is like another way of doing that. You can kind of measure the size differences in the hand as it changes over time. I think that's pretty neat. And then this other one was the oil pastel one. You guys can kind of see. I think it came out really well. What I like about it is the colors. I tried to add, like, you can see like the darker blue color there to add a sense of depth to the feathers. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how it came out. Okay. But yeah, feel free to use that as an example to follow at home. If you're interested in recreating your own, they're pretty easy to make, especially the handprint one. You can like trace it on construction paper, like brown construction paper, cut that out, and using like yellow, orange, and red construction paper, create the feathers and the beak, the wattle, the feet, etc. There's all kinds of creative ideas you can try when it comes to those projects. So for any of you that maybe wanted to watch me creating those for the art stream, I'm sorry that you missed it, but I'll just say it's a Twitch thing. But yeah, at least you got to see the finished product, so there you go. Okay, here we go, chapter 14. At 5 in the morning it was still quite dark. The troops of the center, the reserves, and Bagration's right flank had not yet moved. But on the left flank, the columns of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, which were to be the first to descend the heights to attack the French right flank and drive it into the Bohemian Mountains according to plan, were already up in a stir. Yeah, this is one of those book series that I may not complete. War and Peace. Crime and Punishment I'll definitely complete, but I'm not sure about War and Peace. It might just take too long to do. The smoke of the campfires into which they were throwing everything superfluous made the eyes smart. It was cold and dark. The officers were hurriedly drinking tea and breakfasting. The soldiers, munching biscuit and beating a tattoo with their feet to warm themselves. Gathering round the fires, throwing into the flames the remains of sheds, chairs, tables, wheels, tubs, and everything that they did not want or could not carry away with them. Austrian column guides were moving in and out among the Russian troops and served as heralds of the advance. I know it was like a pretty big thing in World War II for like soldiers to loot. Like they say that like the Nazis looted a lot of French like artworks and stuff like that. And apparently they found them. They recovered some of those artworks and like French treasures in Berlin at the conclusion of the war. But yeah, I'm not really sure how common that was in these days, in Napoleon's days. I assume it still happened, but yeah, the soldiers could only hold on to what they could carry. It looks like they're needing to free up some space, like free up some actual space so they can move. Presumably it happened back then though. But in this time, I think the French were in the position to do that kind of stuff because they were the ones that were winning a lot of the battles. The Germans weren't really doing as well in the Napoleonic era. Even with the help of Russia, they still were not doing as well. Austrian column guides were moving in and out among the Russian troops and served as heralds of the advance. As soon as an Austrian officer showed himself near a commanding officer's quarters, the regiment began to move. The soldiers ran from the fires, thrust their pipes into their boots, their bags into their carts, got their muskets ready, and formed rank. Like, I think what's really fascinating is the history of the Tsar lineage, and the wars and the battles are interesting. Like Princess Catherine's exploits. Let's see, I'm pretty sure it's Princess. Tsar Catherine the Great, yeah. She might have been a princess before she became a Tsar. But yeah, her exploits are interesting to read about. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I forgot, I need to plug my phone in. It's getting low on battery. Alright, hold on a second. Plug you guys in. There you go. Should be charging now. Alrighty. As soon as an Austrian officer showed himself near a commanding officer's quarters, the regiment began to move. Soldiers ran from the fires, thrust their pipes into their boots, their bags into the carts, got their muskets ready, and formed rank. The officers buttoned up their coats, buckled on their swords and pouches, and moved along the ranks shouting. The train drivers and orderlies harnessed and packed the wagons and tied on the loads. The adjutants and battalion and regimental commanders mounted, crossed themselves, gave final instructions, orders and commissions to the baggage men who remained behind, and the monotonous tramp of thousands of feet resounded. The column moved forward without knowing where, and unable, from the masses around them, the smoke and the increasing fog, to see either the place they were leaving or that to which they were going. A soldier on the march is hemmed in and borne along by his regiment as much as a sailor is by his ship. However far he has walked, whatever strange, unknown, and dangerous places he reaches, just as a sailor is, always surrounded by the same decks, masts, and rigging of his ship, so the soldier always has around him the same comrades, the same ranks, the same Sergeant Major Ivan Mitrich, the same company dog Jack, and the same commanders. Sailor rarely cares to know the latitude in which his ship is sailing, but on the day of battle, heaven knows how and whence, a stern note of which all are conscious, sounds in the moral atmosphere of an army, announcing the approach of something decisive and solemn, and awakening in the men an unusual curiosity. On the day of battle, the soldiers excitedly try to get beyond the interests of the regiment. They listen intently, look about, and eagerly ask concerning what is going on around them. The fog had grown so dense that, though it was growing light, they could not see 10 paces ahead. This wasn't long after George Washington said, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," because weather conditions were a pretty big factor in battles in those days. I think it's less the case now, what with there being nuclear weapons and stuff, but I think it's still the case even though it's to a lesser extent in modern times. We've got like radio waves and stuff like that. Bushes look like gigantic trees and level ground like cliffs and slopes. Anywhere on any side one might encounter an enemy invisible 10 paces off. But the columns advanced for a long time, always in the same fog, descending and ascending hills, avoiding gardens and enclosures, going over new and unknown ground, and nowhere encountering the enemy. On the contrary, the soldiers became aware that in front, behind, and on all sides, other Russian columns were moving in the same direction. Every soldier felt glad to know that to the unknown place where he was going, many more of our men were going too. There now, the Kurskis have gone past, was being said in the ranks. It's wonderful what a lot of our troops have gathered, lads. Last night I looked at the campfires and there was no end of them. Regular Moscow. Though none of the column commanders rode up to the ranks or talked to the men, the commanders, as we saw at the Council of War, were out of humor and dissatisfied with the affair, so did not exert themselves to cheer the men, but merely carried out the orders. Yet the troops marched gaily, as they always do when going into action, especially to attack. But when they had marched for about an hour in the dense fog, the greater part of the men had to halt, and an unpleasant consciousness of some dislocation and blunder spread through the ranks. How such a consciousness is communicated is very difficult to define, but it certainly is communicated very surely. Flows rapidly, imperceptibly, and irrepressibly, as water does in a creek. Had the Russian army been alone without any allies, it might perhaps have been a long time before this consciousness of mismanagement became a general conviction. But as it was, the disorder was readily and naturally attributed to the stupid Germans. Everyone was convinced that dangerous muddle had been occasioned by the sausage eaters. Why have we stopped? Is the way blocked? Or have we already come up against the French? No one can't hear them. They'd be firing if we had. They were in a hurry enough to start us, and now here we stand in the middle of a field without rhyme or reason. It's all those damn Germans muddling. What stupid devils. I think it's naturally for people to just play the blame game. It's like, just don't assume any responsibility at all. Just blame the Germans. You might be messing about and not ready for combat, but as long as the Germans are there, you'll have them to blame. Alright. I'd send them on in front, but no fear, they're crowding up behind, and now here we stand hungry. I say, shall we soon be clear? They say the cavalry are blocking the way, said an officer. Those damn Germans, they don't know their own country, said another. What division are you? Shouted an adjutant riding out. The 18th. Like in modern times, it's like the whoever's like different from you. So like in the Trump era, it's like the Mexican immigrants. You know, it's like okay. And now it's like the anti-vaxxers, right? It's like they're the real enemy. Or before them, it's like the Russians with the election interference. It's like people just need someone to chase with their torches and pitchforks, you know. It's like, there he is, get him. But in these days, it was the Germans. History is a funny way of repeating itself. Alright, let's see. Then why are you here? You should have gone on long ago. Now you won't get there till evening. What stupid orders? They don't themselves know what they're doing, said the officer and rode off. Then a general rode past shouting something angrily, not in Russian. Tafalafa, but what he's jabbering no one can make out, said a soldier, mimicking the general who had ridden away. I'd shoot them, the scoundrels. We were ordered to be at the place before 9. We haven't got halfway. Fine orders. It was being repeated on different sides. The feeling of energy with which the troops had started began to turn into vexation and anger at the stupid arrangements and at the Germans. The cause of the confusion was that while the Austrian cavalry was moving toward our left flank, the higher command found that our center was too far separated from our right flank. The cavalry were all ordered to turn back to the right. Several thousand cavalry crossed in front of the infantry, who had to wait. At the front of an altercation occurred between an Austrian guide and an a Russian general. The general shouted a demand that the cavalry should be halted. The Austrian argued that not he, but the higher command was to blame. The troops meanwhile stood, growing listless and dispirited. After an hour's delay, they at last moved on, descending the hill. The fog that was dispersing on the hill lay still more densely below, where they were descending. In front, in the fog, a shot was heard, and then another. First irregularly at varying intervals, tat, and then more regularly and rapidly. The action at the Goldback stream began. I read The Art of War a while ago by Sun Tzu. Almost too long ago for me to remember anything about it. But one of the things I do remember is like, know thyself, know thy enemy, and foster like the value spies, of course, and it's like foster dissent in the ranks. If you can foster dissent in the ranks of the enemy, they will become their own enemy, and you'll be able to defeat them a lot more easily, much easier. And that is, I think, part of the reason why Napoleon's going to be able to win so easily against them, because they're fighting themselves, basically. Like, he's not going to have to do as much to overcome them because they're infighting, they're bickering, they're weakening themselves. I've got to use the bathroom. I'll be right back. not expecting to come on the enemy down by the stream, having stumbled on him in the fog. Hearing no encouraging word from their commanders, with the consciousness of being too late spreading through the ranks, and above all being unable to see anything in front or around them in the thick fog, the Russians exchanged shots with the enemy lazily in advance, and again halted, receiving no timely orders from the officers or adjutants who wandered about in the fog in those unknown surroundings, unable to find their own regiments. In this way, the action began for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd columns, which had gone down into the valley. The 4th column, with which Kutuzov was, stood on the Pratzen Heights. Yeah, someday I think I'm going to want to go to Europe and spend like 2 or 3 months there and just kind of explore, be a tourist, maybe try to see some of these historical sites and stuff in person. That trip might not be for another couple years though, like 2 or 3 years out. I was thinking about doing it this year, but life got in the way a little bit. Plus, we still, technically, you think we still do technically have the pandemic going on, so that might make it less than ideal to go now. But yeah, once that's out of the way, then it might make sense to go. Plus, I might need to save up some more money. But, yeah, that's going to be a cool trip. Nothing else to experience the cultures and learn more about my family history and stuff. Plus, I'll be able to see what it's like. Never been to Paris or London, so it's going to be an experience when I go, for sure. I've already got my passport, so that's a step closer. Alright. Yeah, ideally I'm going to try to go to like a foreign country once per year. At least one. Next year I'd like to go to Japan. I'll probably go during the summer. Go for like a month or something like that. They don't know how to speak Japanese. That's the biggest problem. I'll have to use my translator. Alright, let's see. I think if I'm in like Tokyo or something, I think there's a decent amount of people who speak English. I went to Cancun earlier this year, and it's probably gonna be like that, where I just have to like go slow with people who only speak the local language. Language barriers. Yeah, luckily it didn't cause any problems with me not speaking Spanish. And with Spanish, it's like I know enough Spanish to convey like basic ideas, like my name, I can introduce myself, I can ask basic questions. Japanese, it's like a whole nother ball game. Like yeah, I'm probably gonna have to look up a lot of information. But yeah, Japan's gonna be cool. If only to see the cherry blossoms. Man, my nose is itching. Okay, better now. Below where the fight was beginning, there was still thick fog. On the higher ground it was clearing, but nothing could be seen of what was going on in front. Whether all the enemy forces were, as we suppose, 6 miles away, or whether they were nearby in that sea of mist, no one knew till after 8 o'clock. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. The fog lay unbroken like a sea down below, but higher up at the village of Schlepanich, where Napoleon stood with his marshals round him, it was quite light. Above him was a clear blue sky, and the sun's vast orb quivered like a huge hollow crimson float on the surface of that milky sea of mist. The whole French army, and even Napoleon himself with his staff, were not on the far side of the streams and hollow of Sokolnitz and Schlapanitch, beyond which we intended to take up our position and begin the action. But we're on this side, so close to our own forces that Napoleon, with the naked eye, could distinguish a mounted man from one on foot. Yeah, times have changed a lot, I would say. Like, I don't think George W. would have been within sight of any of the members of Al-Qaeda on the ground in Iraq during the whole invasion. Because nowadays they got like sniper rifles and rifles that probably could pick you apart from that distance. Like even just an AK probably could take him out at that range. Napoleon in the blue cloak, which he had worn on his Italian campaign, sat on his small gray Arab horse, a little in front of his marshal. He gazed silently at the hills, which seemed to rise out of the sea of mist, and on which the Russian troops were moving in the distance. He listened to the sounds of firing in the valley. Not a single muscle of his face, which in those days was still thin, moved. His gleaming eyes were fixed intently on one spot. His predictions were being justified. Part of the Russian force had already descended into the valley, toward the ponds and lakes, and part were leaving these Pratzen heights, which he intended to attack and regarded as the key to the position. He saw over the mist that, in a hollow between two hills near the village of Pratzen, the Russian columns, their bayonets glittering, were moving continuously in one direction toward the valley, and disappearing one another into the mist. Like, it's almost amazing in some ways to think about how much military technology has changed, like even in just 300 years. Like, back in those days, muskets had bayonets affixed on them because of how long it took to, like, load your weapon, how long it took to reload it. Like, you'd shoot, and then there were times in combat where, like, you wouldn't have time to reload your gun. So you'd have to, like, charge at them with your bayonet. Yeah, times have changed a lot. From information he'd received the evening before, from the sound of wheels and footsteps heard by the outposts during the night, by the disorderly movement of the Russian columns, and from all indications, he saw clearly that the Allies believed him to be far away in front of them, and that the columns moving near Pratzen constituted the center of the Russian army, and that the center was already sufficiently weakened to be successfully attacked. But still he did not begin the engagement. Today was a great day for him, the anniversary of his coronation. Before dawn he had slept for a few hours, and refreshed, vigorous, and in good spirits he mounted his horse and rode out into the field in that happy mood in which everything seems possible and everything succeeds. He sat motionless, looking at the heights visible above the mist, and his cold face wore that special look of confident, self-complacent happiness that one sees on the face of a boy happily in love. The marshal stood behind him, not venturing to distract his attention. He looked now at the Pratzen heights, now at the sun floating up out of the mist. Yeah, I think what changed the game was the machine gun. I think that's what completely changed the whole war, the whole way war was conducted. But I believe it would be another 40 years before it would be invented. Was it invented in World War I? It was invented by Gatling, hence the Gatling gun. The mid-19th century, which would have been about 1850. Yeah, about 40 or 50 years before it would be invented. But yeah, that thing changed everything. When the sun had entirely emerged from the fog, and fields and mist were aglow with dazzling light, As if he had only awaited this to begin the action, he drew the glove from his shapely white hand, made a sign with it to the marshals, and ordered the action to begin. The marshals, accompanied by adjutants, galloped off in different directions, and a few minutes later the chief forces of the French army moved rapidly toward those Pratzen heights, which were being more and more denuded. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Denuded. Strip of covering possessions or assets, make bare. Denuded. By Russian troops moving down the valley to their left. That's chapter 14 next time, chapter 15. I do like the shorter War and Peace chapters, like that's nice. Crime and Punishment chapters are very long, but that is balanced by the fact that a lot happens in the chapters, and the book itself is overall shorter. Like, a lot happened in the last chapter, like Luzhin came into Katerina Ivanovna's dinner party commemorating the death of her husband Marmeladov. He accuses Sonia of stealing. We find out from what's his name, Lebezhnikov? I think it's Lebezhnikov. We find out from Lebezhnikov that he planted it on Sonia. And then we kind of see the whole dinner party. There, that's better. You see like the whole dinner party like reacting to first Luzhin's accusation, and then Lebezhnikov's explanation of how the money got in her pocket, and then Raskolnikov came to Sonia's defense. Like, there was a lot that happened. It was a long chapter, but a lot happened. And let's see, at the end of the chapter, I think Evdotia, like, we didn't see Duny at all in this chapter. But we did see the landlady. What was her name? Amelia, I think. Yeah, Amelia, sorry. Amelia Ivanovna. Funnily enough, Amelia is actually my grandmother's name. But, yeah, she passed away a while back when I was, I think, 10 years old, maybe? I don't know, it was a long time ago. Maybe before that, even. Yeah, Amelia Ivanovna basically kicked out Katerina after their argument. And what was the catalyst? I think someone threw something at Amelia, and then she responds by going after Katerina, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so someone threw something at her, I think. Yeah, someone throws a glass at her, and then she takes it out on Katerina, and she starts throwing her stuff on the ground. And then Katerina retaliates. And then yeah, and I think Amelia kicks her out. is like tearing the place apart. And like a lot of the people are still in the party like, whoa, that was cool, dude. I wasn't expecting all that. Apparently a lot of people at the party weren't even that close to Marmeladov. It's like just like a bunch of random people show up. We heard there was a party here. And Raskolnikov's like, it's time for me to leave. I think it's time for me to leave. Blink-182 reference there. A song that is not appropriate for kids. Let me just put it that way. Alright. Well, Sophia, we shall see what you say now. And he heads off for Sonia's place. We find ourselves in chapter 4. Raskolnikov had been a vigorous and active champion of Sonia against Luzhin, although he had such a load of horror and anguish in his own heart. Yet having gone through so much in the morning, he found a sort of relief in a change of sensations, apart from the strong personal feeling which impelled him to defend Sonia. Like, I was half expecting him to attack Luzhin. Like, they've just not been on good terms. Like, even before the whole Sonia incident, they were not doing well because Raskolnikov is the whole reason why he broke up with Dunya. He was agitated too, especially at some moments, by the thought of his approaching interview with Sonia. He had to tell her who had killed Lizaveta. It was him. He knew the terrible suffering would be to him, and, as it were, brushed away the thought of it. So when he cried as he left Katerina Ivanovna's, "Well, Sophia Semyonovna, we shall see what you'll say now," he was still superficially excited, still vigorous and defiant from his triumph over Luzhin. But, strange to say, by the time he reached Sonia's lodging, he felt a sudden impotence and fear. He stood still in hesitation at the door, asking himself the strange question: must he tell her who killed Lizaveta? It was a strange question because he felt at the very time not only that he could not help telling her, but also that he could not put off the telling. He did not yet know why it must be so. He only felt it. And the agonizing sense of his impotence before the inevitable almost crushed him. Well, if you want a clear conscience, then yes you do, but you can lie. That's a possibility. To cut short his hesitation and suffering, he quickly opened the door and looked at Sonia from the doorway. I have a funny feeling, though, that based on what we know about Sonia, that she would forgive him anyway. She's probably one of the nicest people in the book, in spite of all the stuff that she's been through. She's like, yeah, she's got a good heart, basically, in spite of the fact that she's been dragged through the mud, basically. She's like the polar opposite of Peter Petrovich. She was sitting with her elbows on the table and her face in her hands. But seeing Raskolnikov, she got up at once and came to meet him as though she were expecting him. "What would have become of me but for you?" she said quickly, meeting him in the middle of the room. Technically, I think she would have been okay just with Lebezhnikov's testimony. Like, just with Lebezhnikov's explanation, I think she would have been okay. If it weren't for that, though, yeah, she would have been in trouble. With the planted $100 bill. Evidently, she was in haste to say this to him. It was what she had been waiting for. I think Raskolnikov did help, though. Raskolnikov went to the table and sat down on the chair from which she had only just risen. She stood facing him 2 steps away, just as she had done the day before. "Well, Sonia," he said, and felt that his voice was trembling. "It was all due to your social position and the habits associated with it. Did you understand that just now?" Her face showed her distress. I think Peter was attacking her to get back at Raskolnikov. And yeah, her job choice didn't help matters, but yeah, it's like that sometimes. Only don't talk to me as you did yesterday, she interrupted him. Please don't begin it. There is misery enough without that. I can't really remember. I think that's when Raskolnikov was like expressing his feelings for her. He's like, we're the same. Don't you get it? We're the same. She's like, slow down, Romeo. Maybe that's what she's referring to. She made haste to smile, afraid that he might not like the approach. Not like the reproach. It was silly to come away from there. What is happening there now? I wanted to go back directly, but I kept thinking that you would come. You told her that Amelia Ivanovna was turning them out of their lodging, and that Katerina Ivanovna had run off somewhere to seek justice. My God, cried Sonia, let's go at once. And she snatched up her cape. It's everlastingly the same thing, said Raskolnikov irritably. You've no thought except for them. Stay a little with me. Pretty selfish thing to say, but okay. But Katerina Ivanovna. You won't lose Katerina Ivanovna. You may be sure she'll come to you herself since she has run out, he added peevishly. If she doesn't find you here, you'll be blamed for it. Sonia sat down in painful suspense. Raskolnikov was silent, gazing at the floor and deliberating. This time Luzhin did not want to prosecute you, he began, not looking at Sonia. But if he had wanted to, if it had suited his plans, he would have sent you to prison if it had not been for Lubezhnikov and me. Yes, she assented in a faint voice. Yes, she repeated, preoccupied and distressed. But I might easily not have been there. It was quite an accident Lubezhnikov's turning up. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty good fortune that Lubezhnikov saw it all and he's of good moral standing, because if that were not the case, yeah, Sonia could have been sent to jail for a crime she didn't commit, sadly. Sonia was silent. And if you'd gone to prison, what then? Do you remember what I said yesterday? Again, she did not answer. He waited. I thought you would cry out again, don't speak of it, leave off. Raskolnikov gave a laugh, but rather a forced one. What silence again? He asked a minute later. We must talk about something, you know. It would be interesting for me to know how you would decide a certain problem, as Lubezhnikov would say. He was beginning to lose the thread. No, really, I'm serious. Imagine, Sonia, that you had known all Luzhin's intentions beforehand. Known, that is, for a fact, that they would be the ruin of Katerina Ivanovna and the children and yourself thrown in, since you don't count yourself for anything. Polanka, too, or she'll go the same way. Well, suddenly it all depended on your decision whether he or they should go on living. That is, whether Luzhin should go on living doing wicked things, or Katerina Ivanovna should die. How'd you decide which of them was to die? I asked you. Sonia looked uneasily at him. There was something peculiar in this hesitating question, which seemed approaching something in a roundabout way. I think Sonia would probably pick for Luzhin to die, but again, she doesn't really seem the type of person to wish death on anybody, so it seems like a strange question for Raskolnikov to ask. I felt that you were going to ask some question like that, she said, looking inquisitively at him. I dare say you did, but how is it to be answered? Why do you ask about what could not happen? Said Sonia reluctantly. And it would be better for Luzhin to go on living and doing wicked things. You haven't dared to decide even that. But I can't know the divine providence. Why do you ask what can't be answered? What's the use of such foolish questions? I'm on the same page, homegirl. How could it happen that it could depend on my decision? Who's made me a judge to decide who's to live and who's not to live? Did I not just say she would say that? Hands down, she's probably the purest character in this book. In spite of the fact, like I said, that she's been through hell, basically. Well, if divine providence is to be mixed up in it, there's no doing anything. Raskolnikov grumbled morosely. You better say straight out what you want, Sonia cried in distress. You're leading up to something again. Can you have come simply to torture me? She could not control herself and began crying bitterly. He looked at her in gloomy misery. 5 minutes passed. Of course you're right, Sonia, he said softly at last. He was suddenly changed. His tone of assumed arrogance and helpless defiance was gone. Even his voice was suddenly weak. I told you yesterday that I was not coming to ask forgiveness, and almost the first thing I've said is to ask forgiveness. I said that about Luzhin and Providence for my own sake. I was asking forgiveness, Sonia. He tried to smile, but there was something helpless and incomplete in his pale smile. He bowed his head and hid his face in his hands. And suddenly a strange, surprising sensation of a sort of bitter hatred for Sonia passed through his heart. As it were wondering and frightened of this sensation, he raised his head and looked intently at her. But he met her uneasy and painfully anxious eyes fixed on him. There was love in them. His hatred vanished like a phantom. Yeah, I don't think Raskolnikov's a good match for Sonia. She's like someone who does morally questionable things out of necessity. He does morally questionable things because, you know, it's just what happened at the time, like circumstance. Yeah, I don't see it, but stranger things have happened. It was not the real feeling. He had taken the one feeling for the other. It only meant that that minute had come. He hid his face in his hands again and bowed his head. Suddenly he turned pale, got up from his chair, looked at Sonia, and without uttering a word sat down mechanically on her bed. I think who would be a good match for Sonia is maybe like Razumhin. Like maybe the good friend maybe could be a good match. His sensations that moment were terribly like the moment when he had stood over the old woman with the axe in his hand and felt that he must not lose another minute. Like he's getting like nervous. Like, what's the word? Like, is it anxiety? It might be like angst or something. Apprehension, I guess. It's the one way of saying it. Yeah, but I was gonna say Razumhin, of course, has feelings for Dunya. Yeah, for Dunya, so yeah, he's going another way. What's the matter? Asked Sonia dreadfully frightened. He could not utter a word. This was not at all the way he had intended to tell, and he did not understand what was happening to him now. She went up to him softly, sat down on the bed beside him, and waited, not taking her eyes off him. Her heart throbbed and sank. It was unendurable. He turned his deadly pale face to her. His lips worked, helplessly struggling to utter something. A pang of terror passed through Sonia's heart. What's the matter? She repeated, drawing a little away from him. Nothing, Sonia. Don't be frightened. It's nonsense. It really is nonsense, if you think of it. He muttered like a man in delirium. He's like, I just killed 2 people. It's not a big deal. And one of them was your good friend, Lizaveta. Why have I come to torture you? He added suddenly, looking at her. Why really? I keep asking myself that question, Sonia. He had perhaps been asking himself that question a quarter of an hour before, but now he spoke helplessly, hardly knowing what he said and feeling a continual tremor all over. Oh, how you're suffering, she muttered in distress, looking intently at him. It's all nonsense. Listen, Sonia. He suddenly smiled, a pale, helpless smile for 2 seconds. You remember what I meant to tell you yesterday? Sonia waited uneasily. I said as I went away that perhaps I was saying goodbye forever, but that if I came today, I would tell you who killed Lizaveta. She began trembling all over. Well, here I've come to tell you. Then you really meant it yesterday, she whispered with difficulty. How do you know? She asked quickly, as though suddenly regaining her reason. Sonia's face grew paler and paler, and she breathed painfully. I know. She paused a minute. Have they found him? She asked timidly. No. I'm still on the lam. Then how do you know about it? She asked again, hardly audibly, and again after a minute's pause. He turned to her and looked very intently at her. Yes, he said with the same distorted, helpless smile. I have a feeling that he's going to confess to Sonia, and I have a feeling that she's going to forgive him. Shudder passed over her. But why do you frighten me like this? She said, smiling like a child. I must be a great friend of his, since I know. Raskolnikov went on, still gazing into her face, as though he could not turn his eyes away. He did not mean to kill that Lizaveta. He killed her accidentally. And meant to kill the old woman when she was alone, and he went there. And then Lizaveta came in. He killed her too. Another awful moment passed. Both still gazed at one another. You can't guess then, he asked suddenly, feeling as though he were flinging himself down from a steeple. No, whispered Sonia. Take a good look. As soon as he had said this again, the same familiar sensation froze in his heart. He looked at her and all at once seemed to see in her the face of Lizaveta. He remembered clearly the expression in Lizaveta's face when he approached her with the axe, and she stepped back to the wall, putting out her hand with childish terror in her face, looking as old children do when they begin to be frightened of something, looking intently and uneasily at what frightens them, shrinking back and holding out their little hands on the point of crying. Almost the same thing happened now to Sonia. With the same helplessness and the same terror, she looked at him for a while, and suddenly putting out her left hand, pressed her fingers faintly against his breast, and slowly began to get up from the bed, moving further from him and keeping her eyes fixed even more immovably on him. Her terror infected him. The same fear showed itself on his face. In the same way, he stared at her, and almost with the same childish smile. Again, I don't think they're a good match, but okay. Have you guessed? He whispered at last. Good God, broke in an awful wail from her bosom. She sank helplessly on the bed with her face in the pillows, but a moment later she got up, moved quickly to him, seized both his hands, and gripping them tight in her thin fingers, began looking into his face again with the same intense stare. In this last desperate look, she tried to look into him and catch some last hope. But there was no hope. There was no doubt remaining. It was all true. Later on, indeed, when she recalled that moment, she thought it strange and wondered why she had seen at once that there was no doubt. She could not have said, for instance, that she had foreseen something of the sort, and yet now, as soon as he told her, she suddenly fancied that she had really foreseen this very thing. Stop, Sonia, enough. Don't torture me, he begged her miserably. It's not at all like this he had thought of telling her, but this is how it happened. She jumped up, seeming not to know what she was doing, wringing her hands, walked into the middle of the room, but quickly went back and sat down again beside him, her shoulder almost touching his. All of a sudden she started as though she had been stabbed, uttered a cry, and fell on her knees before him. She did not know why. Really, he could have confessed to anybody else. Like, anybody else. He could have told Razmahin, for that matter. But he has to tell Sonia, who's been, like I said, through hell and back. I don't know why. What have you done? What have you done to yourself? She said in despair. Jumping up, she flung herself on his neck, threw her arms around him, and held him tightly. Raskolnikov drew back and looked at her with a mournful smile. You're a strange girl, Sonia. You kiss me and hug me, and when I tell you about that, you don't think what you're doing. There is no one in the whole world now so unhappy as you, she cried in a frenzy, not hearing what he said. She suddenly broke into violent hysterical weeping. A feeling long unfamiliar to him flooded his heart and softened it at once. He did not struggle against it. The two tears started rolling into his eyes and hung on his eyelashes. The responsible thing for him to do would be for him to turn himself in, but he would rather do his own thing, basically. Like most serial killers, he does not care at all. Then you won't leave me, Sonia, he said, looking at her almost with hope. No, no, never, nowhere, cried Sonia. I will follow you. I'll follow you everywhere. Oh my God. Oh, how miserable I am. Why? Why didn't I know you before? Why didn't you come before? Oh dear. Here I have come. Yes, now, what's to be done now? Together, together, she repeated as it were unconsciously. She hugged him again. I'll follow you to Siberia. He recoiled at this, and the same hostile, almost haughty smile came to his lips. Perhaps I don't want to go to Siberia yet, Sonia, he said. Again, he likes avoiding responsibility and likes avoiding accountability. Sonia looked at him quickly. Again, after her first passionate, agonizing sympathy for the unhappy man, the terrible idea of the murder overwhelmed her. In his changed tone, she seemed to hear the murderer speaking. She looked at him bewildered. She knew nothing as yet. Why, how with that object it had been? Now all these questions rushed at once into her mind, and again she could not believe it. He is a murderer. Could it be true? What's the meaning of it? Where am I? She said in complete bewilderment, as though still unable to recover herself. How could you, a man like you? How could you bring yourself to it? What does it mean? Oh well, to plunder. Leave off, Sonia. He answered wearily, almost with vexation. Like, there's a difference between homicidal maniacs and, like, depressed dudes. Depressed dudes would rather just kill themselves. This is not like a typical depressed dude. This is like a homicidal maniac, which frankly belong in jail. Like, they should not be like running around willy-nilly like Raskolnikov was doing. To plunder. Leave off, Sonia, he answered weirdly, almost with vexation. Sonia stood as though struck dumb, but suddenly she cried. You were hungry. It was to help your mother, yes? No, Sonia, no, he muttered, turning away and hanging his head. I was not so hungry. I certainly did want to help my mother, but that's not the real thing either. Don't torture me, Sonia. Sonia clasped her hands. Like, he did not do this for good reasons. Like, could it all be true? Good God, what a truth. Who could believe it? And how could you give away your last farthing and yet rob and murder? She cried suddenly. That money you gave Katerina Ivanovna, that money. Can that money? No, Sonia, he broke in hurriedly. That money was not it. Don't worry yourself. That money my mother sent me, and it came when I was ill. The day I gave it to you, Razumhin saw it. He received it for me. That money was mine, my own. Sonia listened to him in bewilderment and did her utmost to comprehend. And that money, I don't even know really whether there was any money, he added softly, as though reflecting. I took a purse off her neck, made of chamois leather, purse stuffed full of something, but I didn't look in it. I supposed I hadn't time. And the things, chain and trinkets, I buried under a stone with the purse next morning in a yard off the V Prospect. They're all there now. Yes, Raskolnikov, because the fact that you didn't immediately try to pawn all of her stuff makes it that much better. Like, Sonia strained every nerve to listen. Then why? Why you said you did rob it? Or hang on. Then why? Why you said you did it to rob, but you took nothing? She asked quickly, catching at the straw. He definitely took her stuff, and he buried it somewhere, and I think it was found by someone else who was falsely accused of the crime. Yeah, it happened like 10 chapters ago. We've already forgotten. He tried to kill himself because he was accused of this murder that Raskolnikov actually did. Actually pretty sad, the other guy's story. I don't know, I haven't yet decided whether to take that money or not, he said, amusing again. Seeming to wake up with a start, he gave a brief ironical smile. What silly stuff I'm talking, huh? Yes, I'd say so. The thought flashed through Sonia's mind. Wasn't he mad? But she dismissed it at once. No, it was something else. She could make nothing of it, nothing. Do you know, Sonia, he said suddenly with conviction, let me tell you, if I'd simply killed because I was hungry, laying stress on every word and looking enigmatically but sincerely at her, I should be happy now. You must believe that. What would it matter to you, he cried a moment later with a sort of despair. What would it matter to you if I were to confess that I did wrong? What do you gain by such a stupid triumph over me? How soon was it for that I've come to you today? Like, this was not about survival. I think, yeah, it was not about survival. It was senseless crime, basically. Again, Sonia tried to say something, but did not speak. I asked you to go with me yesterday because you're all I have left. Go where? Asked Sonia timidly. I guess we should be somewhat grateful for the fact that Raskolnikov has not, like, pulled a Dorian and, like, kept killing. But, yeah, he should turn himself in. Alright, I'll be right back. I gotta use the bathroom to get a refill. Okay, I'm back. Go where? Asked Sonia timidly. Not to steal and not to murder. Don't be anxious, he smiled bitterly. We're so different. And you know, Sonia, it's only now, only this moment that I understand where I asked you to go with me yesterday. Yesterday when I said it, I did not know where. I asked you for one thing. I came to you for one thing. Not to leave me. You won't leave me, Sonia. Again, stupid and selfish, he is nothing like Sonia. Like, they are not even remotely similar characters. She squeezed his hand. Why? Why did I tell her? Why did I let her know? He cried a minute later in despair. looking with infinite anguish at her. Here you expect an explanation from me, Sonia. You're sitting and waiting for it, I see that. But what can I tell you? You won't understand and will only suffer misery, on my account. Well, you're crying and embracing me again. He doesn't have an explanation because there is none. It was a heat of the moment kind of thing. Crime for the sake of crime. Like, it was freaking dumb. Why do you do it? Because I couldn't bear my burden and have come to throw it on another. You suffer too, and I shall feel better. Can you love such a mean wretch? But aren't you suffering too? Cried Sonia. Again a wave of the same feeling surged into his heart, and again for an instant softened it. Sonia, I have a bad heart. Take note of that. It may explain a great deal. I have come because I am bad. There are men who wouldn't have come. But I am a coward and a mean wretch. Never mind. That's not the point. I must speak now. But I don't know how to begin. You've been rambling on for like the last 20 minutes about the murders you committed. Like, what do you mean begin? He paused and sank into thought. We're so different, he cried again. Now he's finally talking sense. We're not alike. And why? Why did I come? I shall never forgive myself that. No, it was a good thing you came, cried Sonia. It's better I should know, far better. He looked at her with anguish. What if it really were, really that? He said as though reaching a conclusion. Yes, that's what it was. I wanted to become a Napoleon. That's why I killed her. You understand now. Dude, Napoleon might have led the French armies through the Napoleonic Wars, but he wouldn't have done this, okay? Like, he might have killed hundreds or thousands of men through the Grand Army, but he wouldn't have done this, okay? Even he had military goals to reach. He was trying to be the best military general of all time. I think that's the reason why he did it. Because he wanted to be a good leader. Do you understand now? No, Sonia whispered naively and timidly. Only speak, speak, I shall understand. I shall understand in myself, she kept begging him. You'll understand, very well, we shall see. He paused and was for some time lost in meditation. It was like this. I asked myself one day this question. What if Napoleon, for instance, had happened to be in my place? And if he had not had Toulon nor Egypt nor the passage of Mont Blanc to begin his career with, but instead of all those picturesque and monumental things, there had simply been some ridiculous old hag, a pawnbroker, who had to be murdered, too, to get money from her trunk. For his career, you understand. Again, why he's comparing himself to Napoleon, I have no clue. Would you have brought himself to that if there had been no other means? Wouldn't he have felt a pang at its being so far from monumental, and sinful too? Well, I must tell you that I worried myself fearfully over that question, so that I was awfully ashamed when I guessed at last, all of a sudden somehow, that it would not have given him the least pang, that it would not even have struck him that it was not monumental, that he would not have seen that there was anything in it to pause over, and that if he had no other way, he would have strangled her in a minute without thinking about it. Well, I too left off thinking about it, murdered her following his example. That's exactly how it was. Do you think it funny? Yes, Sonia, the funniest thing of all is that perhaps that's just how it was. Like, he has nothing in common with Sonia or Napoleon. Like, what is he talking about? Sonia did not think it at all funny. You better tell me straight out. Without examples, she begged, still more timidly and scarcely audibly. He turned to her, looked sadly at her, and took her hands. You're right, Sonia. Of course, that's all nonsense. It's almost all talk. You see, you know, of course, that my mother has scarcely anything. My sister happened to have a good education and was condemned to drudge as a governess. All her hopes were centered on me. I was a student, but I couldn't keep myself at the university and was forced for a time to leave it. Even if I'd lingered on like that, in 10 or 12 years I might, with luck, hope to be some sort of teacher or clerk, with a salary of 1,000 rubles. He repeated it as though it were a lesson. By that time, my mother would be worn out with grief and anxiety that I could not succeed in keeping her comfort with, while my sister might well have fared worse. It's a hard thing to pass everything by all one's life, to turn one's back upon everything, to forget one's mother and decorously accept the insults inflicted on one's sister. Still, like between Raskolnikov's family and the Marmeladov house, like there is no comparison. Like they might have been doing bad in Raskolnikov's family, but not nearly as bad as Marmeladov's family. Like there's no way. His dad died, leaving his mom a widow from sickness. Not because he drunk himself silly and spent all the family's money on booze. Okay, like, very different. Alright, where was I? It's a hard thing to pass everything by one's life, to turn one's back on everything, to forget one's mother and decorously accept the insults inflicted on one's sister. Why should one? When one has buried them to burden oneself with others, wife and children. I think I may be reading this again, but it's okay. Okay. Let me skip ahead. So I resolved to gain possession of the old woman's money and to use it for my first years without worrying my mother. To keep myself at the university and for a little while after leaving it. And to do this all on a broad, thorough scale, so as to build up a completely new career and enter upon a new life of independence. Well, that's all. Well, of course, in killing the old woman, I did wrong. Well, that's enough. He struggled to the end of his speech in exhaustion and let his head sink. That's not it. That's not it. Sonia cried in distress. How could one know? That's not right. Not right. Again, Sonia. Slam dunk. Slam dunk is all I gotta say. Slam dunk. You see yourself that it's not right. But I've spoken truly. It's the truth. I mean, it's good that you're telling the truth, but it doesn't make what you did right. As though that could be the truth. Good God. I've only killed a louse, Sonia. A useless, loathsome, harmful creature. Lizaveta was not, she wasn't a bad character, like, she was good standing. Like, her sister might have been a pawn shop, I think she was like a pawn shop owner, but neither character was really bad. Like, he's acting like he killed Peter Petrovich, like he didn't, dude. I too know it wasn't a louse, he answered, looking strangely at her. But I'm talking nonsense, Sonia, he added. I've been talking nonsense a long time. That's not it. You're right there. There were quite other causes for it. I haven't talked to anyone for so long, Sonia. My head aches dreadfully now. His eyes shone with feverish brilliance. He was almost delirious, an uneasy smile strayed on his lips. His terrible exhaustion could be seen through his excitement. Sonia saw how he was suffering. She too was growing dizzy. He talked so strangely it seemed somehow comprehensible, but how, good God. She wrung her hands in despair. Who else says that? I think her mom does, Katerina. Like, that's like their, like, punchline, their, catchphrase. They both say good God all the time. No, Sonia, that's not it, he began again, suddenly raising his head as though a new and sudden train of thought had struck, and as it were roused him. That's not it. Better imagine, yes, it's certainly better. Imagine that I'm vain. She's like, okay, I'm there. Envious, malicious, base, vindictive, and, well, perhaps with a tendency to insanity. Let's have it all out at once. They talked of menace already, I noticed. I told you just now that I could not keep myself at university. But do you know that perhaps I might have done? My mother would have sent me what I needed for the fees, and I could have earned enough for clothes, boots, and food, no doubt. Lessons had turned up at half a ruble. Razmin works. but I turned sulky and wouldn't. Yeah, sulkiness, that's the right word for it. I sat in my room like a spider. You've been in my den, you've seen it. Do you know, Sonia, that low ceilings in tiny rooms cramp the soul and the mind? Don't blame your house, dude. Like, how I hated that garret. Yet I wouldn't go out of it. I wouldn't on purpose. I didn't go out for days together, and it wouldn't work. I wouldn't even eat. I just lay there doing nothing. If Natasha brought me anything, I ate it. If she didn't, I went all day without. I wouldn't ask, on purpose, from sulkiness. At night I had no light. I lay in the dark and I wouldn't earn money for candles. I ought to have studied, but I sold my books, and the dust lies an inch thick on the notebooks on my table. I preferred lying still and thinking. And I kept thinking, and I had dreams all the time, strange dreams of all sorts. No need to describe. Only then I began to fancy that. No, that's not it. Again, I'm telling you wrong. See, I kept asking myself then, why am I so stupid that if others are stupid? I know they are. That I won't be wiser. Then I saw, Sonia, that if one waits for everyone to get wiser, it will take too long. Afterwards, I understand that would never come to pass, that men won't change, and that nobody can alter it, and that it's not worth wasting effort over it. Yes, that's so. That's the law of their nature, Sonia. That's so. And I know now, Sonia, that whoever is strong in mind and spirit will have power over them. Anyone who is greatly daring is right in their eyes. He who despises most things will be a lawgiver among them, and he who dares most of all will be most in the right. So it has been till now, and so will always be. A man must be blind not to see it. Though Raskolnikov looked at Sonia as he said this, he no longer cared whether she understood or not. The fever had complete hold of him. He was in a sort of gloomy ecstasy. He certainly had been too long without talking to anyone. Sonia felt that his gloomy creed had become his faith and code. I'm in love with my sadness. I believe that's Bullet with Butterfly Wings from Smashing Pumpkins. Chanting Kingdoms. Save your prayers when you're really going to need them. That's all I really need. No, it's not Bullet. What is the name of that song? Zero. Yeah, Zero. Whew. I try to get the right name for the song. Yeah, Zero is the name of that song. Okay, let's see. I divined then, Sonia, he went on eagerly, that power is only vouchsafed to a man who dares to stoop and pick it up. There's only one thing needful. One has only to dare. Then for the first time in my life, an idea took shape in my mind which no one had ever thought of before me. No one. I saw clear as daylight how strange it is that not a single person living in this mad world has had the daring to go straight for it all and send it flying to the devil. I wanted to have the daring, and I killed her. I only wanted to have the daring, Sonia. That was the whole cause of it. Okay. Oh, hush, hush, cried Sonia, clasping her hands. You turned away from God, and God has smitten you, has given you over to the devil. Then, Sonia, when I used to lie there in the dark, when all this became clear to me, was it a temptation of the devil, huh? Hush, don't laugh, blasphemer. You don't understand. You don't understand. Oh God, he won't understand. Hush, Sonia, I'm not laughing. I know myself that it was the devil leading me. Hush, Sonia, hush, he repeated with gloomy insistence. I know it all. I've thought it all over and over. Whispered it all over to myself, lying there in the dark. I've argued it all over with myself, every point of it. And I know it all. How sick I was then of going over it all. I kept wanting to forget it. Make a new beginning, Sonia. Leave off thinking. I think you've already done that. You don't suppose that I went into it headlong like a fool. I went into it like a wise man, and that was just my destruction. You mustn't suppose that I didn't know, for instance, that if I begin to question myself whether I had the right to gain power, I certainly had the right. But that if I asked myself whether a human being is a louse, it proves that it wasn't so for me. Though it might be for a man who would go straight to his goal without asking questions. If I worried myself all those days wondering whether Napoleon would have done it or not, I felt clearly, of course, that I wasn't Napoleon. I had to endure all the agony of that battle of ideas, Sonia, and I wanted to throw it off. I wanted to murder without casuistry, to murder for my own sake, for myself alone. I didn't want to lie about it even to myself. It wasn't to help my mother I did the murder. That's nonsense. I didn't do the murder to gain wealth and power, and to become a benefactor of mankind. Now you're talking sense. Nonsense. I simply did it. I did the murder for myself alone. Whether I became a benefactor to others or spent my life like a spider catching men in my web, sucking the life out of men, I couldn't have cared at that moment. It was not the money I wanted, Sonia, when I did it. It was not so much the money I wanted, but something else. I know it all now, understand me. Perhaps I should never have committed a murder again. I wanted to find out something else that led me on. I wanted to find out then and quickly whether I was a louse like everybody else or a man. Whether I can step over barriers or not. Whether I dare stoop to pick up or not. Whether I'm a trembling creature or whether I have the right to kill. Have the right to kill. Sonia clasped her hands. Sonia, he cried irritably and seemed about to make some retort, but was contemptuously silent. Don't interrupt me, Sonia. I want to prove one thing only, that the devil led me on, and he has shown me since that I had not the right to take that path, because I'm such a louse as all the rest. He was mocking me, and here I've come to you now. Welcome your guest. If I were not a louse, should I have come to you? Listen, when I went then to the old woman's, I only went to try. You may be sure of that. There he goes, blaming the devil. Leave the devil out of you. And you murdered her. But how did I murder her? Is that how men do murders? Yeah, pretty much. Any form of weapon is suitable. That's one method you use. An axe is just fine. Did men go to commit a murder as I went then? In those days, yeah, pretty much. I'll tell you someday how I went. Did I murder the old woman? I murdered myself, not her. If only. I crushed myself once and for all, forever. But it was the devil that killed that old woman, not I. Okay. Enough, Sonia, enough. Let me be, he cried in a sudden spasm of agony. Let me be. Raskolnikov's going all out in this chapter, like, he's doing what he can. To prove what a horrible character he is. He leaned his elbows on his knees and squeezed his head in his hands as in a vice. What suffering? A wail of anguish broke from Sonia. What am I to do now? He asked, suddenly raising his head and looking at her with a face hideously distorted by despair. What are you to do? She cried, jumping up, and her eyes that had been full of tears suddenly began to shine. Stand up. She seized him by the shoulder. He got up, looking at her almost bewildered. Go at once. This very minute. Stand at the crossroads. Bow down. First kiss the earth, which you have defiled, and then bow down to all the world. Say to all men aloud, I'm a murderer. Then God will send you life again. Will you go? Will you go? She asked him, trembling all over, snatching his two hands, squeezing them tight in hers, gazing at him with eyes full of fire. Doubt it. Yeah, seriously doubt it. He was amazed at her sudden ecstasy. You mean Siberia, Sonia? I must give myself up, he asked gloomily. Suffer and expiate your sin by it. That's what you must do. Expiate, atone for your sin. But how will you go on living? Who will you live for? Oh, sorry, I skipped the line. No, I'm not going to them, Sonia. But how will you go on living? What will you live for? Cried Sonia. Yeah, pretty much perfect prediction on my part. Like, I know Raskolnikov too well. I know Sonia too well. How is it possible now? Why, how can you talk to your mother? What will become of them now? But what am I saying? You've already abandoned your mother and your sister already. He's abandoned them already. Oh God, she cried. He knows it all himself. How can he live by himself? What will become of you now? Don't be a child, Sonia, he said softly. What wrong have I done them? Why should I go to them? Why should I say to them, that's only a phantom? They destroy men by millions themselves and look on it as a virtue. They're knaves and scoundrels, Sonia. I'm not going to them. What should I say to them? That I murdered her, but I did not dare to take the money and hid it under a stone? He added with a bitter smile. Dude, you still stole the stuff. Like, just because you hid it, under your mattress or whatever, that doesn't mean you didn't steal it. I didn't steal it. See, I put it under a rock. Okay. Why, they would laugh at me and call me a fool for not getting it. Coward and a fool. They wouldn't understand, and they don't deserve to understand. Why should I go to them? I won't. Don't be a child, Sonia. And here he is attacking her for providing reasonable suggestions, which we would expect. And he's still avoiding responsibility. He is rationalizing it completely incorrectly. Like, you're not confessing and turning yourself in for their sake. You're not doing it so they understand you. That's not the point of the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system is there so you can fix your mistake. You'll probably never be able to fix your mistake because you could spend the rest of your life in jail and it still won't bring back Lizaveta and her sister. The prison system is the best we can do because Hammurabi's code is not in effect in some areas. The death penalty is not ubiquitous. Alright, let's see. Where am I? I don't even know if they had it in those days. They probably did. Some version of it. I'm pretty sure this was before the electric chair. Yeah, I think they were doing hangings in those days for capital punishment. Well, maybe it was the 1860s. So, yeah, maybe they had the electric chair in those days. Alright. It will be... Yeah, why should I... Alright, where was I? Don't be a child. Yeah, don't be a child, Sonia. It will be too much to bear. Too much, she repeated, holding out her hands in despairing supplication. Perhaps I've been unfair to myself, he observed gloomily, pondering. Perhaps, after all, I am a man and not a louse, and have been in too great a hurry to condemn myself. I'll make another fight for it. A haughty smile appeared on his lips. What a burden to bear. And your whole life. I shall get used to it, he said grimly and thoughtfully. Listen, he began a minute later. Stop crying. It's time to talk of the facts. I've come to tell you that the police are after me, on my track. Sonia cried in terror. Why do you cry out? You want me to go to Siberia and now you're frightened. But let me tell you, I shall not give myself up. Yeah, we pretty much knew you were going to say that. You haven't done anything, like you've practically done nothing noble throughout the entire novel. Your defense of Sonia was probably like the one positive thing you've done Although you could argue that her trying to break up Peter Petrovich was also a good thing. I shall make a struggle for it, and they won't do anything to me. They have no real evidence. There was a double axe murder. I'm pretty sure in those days there would have been, like, a lot of evidence. Yesterday I was in great danger and believed I was lost. As a matter of fact, the lawyer dude was on the trail. I think someone else confessed to the crime though, which gave him the slip. It was all messed up in those days. But today things are going better. All the facts they know can be explained two ways. That's to say, I can turn their accusations to my credit, do you understand? And I shall, for I have learnt my lesson. But they will certainly arrest me. If I had not been for something that happened, they would have done so today for certain. Perhaps even now they will arrest me today. But that's no matter, Sonia. They'll let me out again, for there isn't any real proof against me, and there won't be. I give you my word of it. They can't convict a man on what they have against me. Enough. I can only tell you that you may know. I'll try to manage somehow to put it to my mother and sister so that they won't be frightened. My sister's future is secure, however, now, I believe. My mother's must be too. That's all. Be careful, though. Will you come and see me in prison when I'm there? Oh, I will. I will. Why? They sat side by side, both mournful and dejected, as though they had been cast out by the tempest alone on some deserted shore. He looked at Sonia and felt how great was her love for him. Strange to say, he felt it suddenly burdensome and painful to be so loved. Yes, it was a strange and awful sensation. On his way to see Sonia, he had felt that all his hopes had rested on her. He expected to be rid of at least part of his suffering, and now, when all her heart turned towards him, he suddenly felt that he was immeasurably unhappier than before. Sonia, he said, you better not come and see me when I'm in prison. Sonia did not answer. She was crying. Several minutes passed. Like, even he's saying, he's like, don't waste your time. Exactly, like, why would you go see him in prison? Why would you waste your time, Sonia? Like, his life is already in the gutter. Like, you don't need to drag yourself down with him, okay? Have you a cross on you? She asked, as though suddenly thinking of it. He did not at first understand the question. No, of course not. Here, take this one. Of cypress wood. I have another, a copper one that belonged to Lizaveta. I changed with Lizaveta. She gave me her cross and I gave her my little icon. I will wear Lizaveta's now and give you this. Take it. It's mine. It's mine, you know, she begged him. We will go to suffer together, and together we will bear our cross. Give it me, said Raskolnikov. He did not want to hurt her feelings, but immediately he drew back the hand he held out for the cross. Not now, Sonia, better later, he added to comfort her. Yes, yes, better, she repeated with conviction. When you go to meet your suffering, then put it on. You will come to me, I'll put it on you, we will pray and go together. At that moment, someone knocked 3 times at the door. Sophia Semyonovna, may I come in? They heard in a very familiar, polite voice. Sonia rushed to the door in fright. The flaxen head of Mr. Lebezhnikov appeared at the door. Okay, whew. That was chapter 4, a mighty long one, but as is the case with Crime and Punishment, a lot happened in that chapter. Like, we got to see Raskolnikov and Sonia's relationship grow. And Raskolnikov finally confessing his crime to somebody. Although he has tried to, I think, before. Maybe it was Lebezhnikov he was trying to tell. Yeah, he just didn't have the chance before now to confess. Actually, more accurately, he did. He just chose not to do so. Like, he could have told Razmahin, true. He could have told his mom. His sister, for that matter. he could have told the police who were interrogating him. Like he's probably had like a half dozen chances to confess, but yeah, this is the first time he actually did. So yeah, we'll have to see if he gets arrested. Soon we're gonna hear from Lebeshnikov in the next chapter. And he also came to Sonya's defense, so yeah. So far what we know about Lebeshnikov is he's a good guy, so it'll be refreshing to see and hear from him. Alright, so that was the Russian Author series. Quick reminder, I will not be streaming tomorrow, Thursday, and probably Friday. I may or may not stream on Friday. Bet not. I will stream today those 3 games: Phoenix, Hearthstone, and Fallout. So thank you for watching. We'll be right back with more.